My name's Aaron. I used to be an electrician in San Francisco until I retired early due to a stroke of luck in the stock market. That was in 2015. With plenty of free time on my hands and very few financial worries, I began to explore the natural beauty of California, a thing I had always wished to do but never had the time for. I began hiking in earnest all over the state, but Yosemite National Park, with its majestic cliffs, waterfalls, and lush forests, always held a special place in my heart. In April 2017, I decided to take on the grueling Yosemite Falls Trail, an 8-mile trek with an altitude change of nearly 3,000 feet. It was challenging, but I had prepared for it. Packed supplies, a map, sturdy boots, and a sense of adventure. After reaching the top of the trail, I decided to stay overnight at the designated campsite near Yosemite Point. As an experienced hiker, I knew that nighttime in the wilderness could be treacherous, but I also appreciated the serenity it offered. That night, I was alone, knowing that at this point of the day, the next set of hikers wouldn't show up until the following day. I spent the evening by a small fire, eating my rationed meal and enjoying the tranquility. As I was getting ready to turn in for the night, a rustling in the underbrush nearby caught my attention. At first, the sound was faint, and so I thought it was just a small mammal of some sort. But then, it emerged. It was about the size of a bear, maybe slightly larger, but it didn't move like any bear I had ever seen. Its legs were unusually long and thin for its size, ending in what appeared to be cloven hooves. Its body was covered in a dark fur that was knotted and filled with dirt. But what stood out most were its eyes. They were a striking amber, glowing in the dark, filled with an intelligence and curiosity that confused me beyond belief. I was rooted to the spot, my heart pounding. It stood on the edge of the clearing, just observing me. It didn't seem hostile, but its sheer size and unfamiliar appearance were intimidating. I held my breath, not daring to move, as it started to circle my campsite, its gaze never leaving me. After some unknown period of time, it slowly backed away into the forest, disappearing as silently as it had arrived. I let out the breath I had been holding and quickly extinguished my fire, retreating into my tent. After that encounter, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing. I had always been a rational man, someone who believed in science and facts, but what I had seen did not fit into any existing categories. It was an unknown, something I wasn't prepared to handle. At dawn, I packed up and practically ran down the trail, driven by a primal urge to put as much distance between me and the creature as possible. Once I got back to my car, the realization of what happened fully sank in. I was shaken, my entire body trembling, a cold sweat breaking out. I went home and did extensive research, trying to find any animal that fit what I had seen. I checked local legends, reports of unknown creatures, everything, but found nothing that matched. For weeks, I couldn't go back to the woods. The place that had given me peace was now tainted by fear and uncertainty. However, as time went on, I realized that as terrifying as the encounter was, the creature had not harmed me. It had observed me, yes, but it had not shown aggression. In some strange way, I felt like it was just as curious about me as I was about it. This realization led me to a sort of acceptance. I started hiking again, but I was more cautious, more respectful of the wilderness and its unknowns. I haven't seen the creature again, but I'm okay with that. It has made me aware that there are still things out there we don't understand, and maybe that's how it should be. I still go to Yosemite. I still love the wilderness, but I respect it more now, aware that I am merely a visitor in a world full of secrets. The fear has lessened, but the awe remains, a constant reminder of the night I came face to face with the unknown. I've been punching the clock behind the wheel for nearly 20 years. I've come across everything from deer to bobcats on those long stretches of highway, but it was a warm night back on August 11th, 2019, near Winnemucca, Nevada, that I had a run-in that still has me checking my mirrors more often than I'd like to admit. I was in the saddle, eastbound and down with a load of appliances out of Sacramento. It was past the witching hour. The moon was riding high, and I was about to scout for a flattened level to catch a few winks when something off the beaten path caught my eye. Nevada's nothing but tumbleweeds and Joshua trees as far as the eye can see, so you'd be forgiven for thinking I'd lost a few of my marbles when I tell you there was a figure out there standing as tall as a roadside billboard. Its body was bulky, like a bulldozer, only covered in this strange, leathery hide that had a weird grayish tint. It moved with an uncanny fluidity, like a dancer in slow motion, and despite its bulk, it didn't seem to be bothered by its size. The thing's arms were crazy long and seemed to sway back and forth as it moved. The hands at the ends were almost brushing the scrubland beneath. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was road-weary, seeing things. But when I looked back, it was still there and closer now. It was then that it turned, and I saw its face. The head was oddly small compared to the torso, perched on a thick neck. But what got me were its eyes, two glowing orbs, shiny as polished chrome, glaring back at me like high beams. I was about ready to stomp the pedal, get the hell out of Dodge, when it let out a sound. Wasn't a roar exactly, more like a low, resonating growl that shook my Freightliner like it was made of tin foil. Nearly knocked me clear out of my seat. Then, quicker than you could say, "What the hell was that?" it was gone. It loped off into the desert with an agility that did not match its size, leaving me gripping the wheel like a vice. After that night, I was pretty tight-lipped about the whole ordeal. Truckers might be known for telling tall tales, but this was one yarn I wasn't keen on spinning. You don't want to be known as the driver who's a few gears short of a full box after all. But that encounter, it messed with my wiring. These days, I go out of my way to avoid Nevada at that time of night. I'll take the long way around, pay the extra for diesel just to avoid that stretch of highway. And on the nights when I can't dodge it, I drive with one eye on the road, the other in the rear view. There's always a chill running down my back as I pass that spot, like someone walking over my grave. To this day, I'm still in the dark about what it was. I've Googled everything I can think of and looked up every animal that walks this earth, and I still can't find anything that matches up. All I know is it's out there, somewhere in that godforsaken desert, and it's a memory etched into my brain as clear as the Nevada sky. I'm writing this to you so you can be forewarned if you're ever driving that stretch. I would suggest you do as I do and keep one eye forward and one eye back. I was never a believer of the paranormal until I had a bizarre encounter that changed my life forever. I live in West Virginia and was always a hard skeptic due to my strict Catholic upbringing. That changed one night when me and my family were out camping in the woods. It was around 10 p.m. and pitch black outside. We were all sitting around the campfire enjoying some steaks that my dad had just cooked. Suddenly, my cousin Jimmy said, "Did you hear that?" We all paused and listened intensely, but we couldn't hear anything. Jimmy insisted that he heard something, so my dad suggested that we go look for whatever it was. We all grabbed our flashlights and walked into the woods. The further we walked, the more uneasy I felt. I had a strong feeling that something was watching us, but I refused to believe that it was anything other than my imagination and Jimmy's paranoia. The woods were eerily quiet. You could hear all three of our feet crunching the leaves beneath us. No insect sounds, no animal noises, just a profound silence. We had been walking for about 10 minutes when suddenly we heard a loud screeching noise coming from above us. The sound of the screech was absolutely bone-chilling. It sounded like a mixture of nails on a chalkboard and the roar of a lion. It sent shivers down my spine and made my hair stand up all over my body. We all looked up and saw a large creature flying directly over us. The beast was huge. I'm talking easily 5 or 6 feet tall. It had big, reflective red eyes that almost looked like they were on fire. Its wingspan was unbelievably massive. The only thing I can compare it to are the wings of a giant bat, leathery and veiny, making a thunderous clap as they flapped. It had thick black feathers covering its entire body. I was absolutely petrified and could not believe what I was seeing. My family members were just as scared as I was, and we all ran away screaming in horror. The woods were thick and dark, except for the small circle of light my flashlight emitted. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a branch made me jump and sent my heart racing faster. I could hear Dad's breathing and Jimmy's footsteps ahead of me. but I felt completely alone in the darkness. I was crying, praying, and desperately running to survive. I tripped over a branch and collapsed to the ground, twisting my ankle in the process. I heard Dad and Jimmy's screams ahead of me. "Help! Run! Faster! Go!" I broke my flashlight and felt my way towards my family's screams. I tried yelling for help, but they were too far ahead of me and screaming too loud to hear me. Finally, my dad started calling for me, and I started to yell loudly enough for him to come look for me. As I saw his flashlight peeking through the trees, I heard the flaps of the beast's wings behind me. I knew it was time to move. I ran toward Dad's flashlight, clenching my jaw as hard as I could to overcome the pain of my twisted ankle. I finally reached my dad, and he started screaming, "Go, go, go!" Suddenly, I heard a loud screeching noise, and something large crashed through the trees towards us. Dad grabbed my hand, and we ran even faster, but I could feel the thing gaining on us. The pain from my ankle was intense, but my desire to escape from the creature was far more powerful. The trees were thinning ahead, and I could see the campsite just beyond. We were almost there when Dad suddenly pulled me back, and we hid behind a tree as the creature flew overhead. It had huge wings that spanned at least 10 feet, and it was screeching so loudly that I thought my ears would bleed. We were all shaking and crying from terror and relief when we finally got back to the campsite. That night is burned into my memory, and I'll never forget how scared I was. We immediately packed up and drove home. There was no way we were staying in those woods any longer. My family and I spent the entire night trying to discount what we saw, but all of us saw the same thing. We were terrified, and I still don't know what to make of it. Was it an alien? A demon? It was later we heard descriptions of the Mothman, the red eyes, the bat wings and body, the anthropomorphic limbs. Could it have been the Mothman that we so desperately ran away from? I was no longer a skeptic, but a believer in the paranormal. I had experienced the Mothman firsthand, and there was no denying that he existed. I researched the Mothman legend online, and I discovered that many people had seen him in West Virginia. He seemed to be drawn to that area for some unknown reason. I later learned that the Mothman is often associated with death and disaster. In 1966, there was a bridge collapse in West Virginia that killed 46 people. Some people believe that the Mothman was responsible for the bridge collapse and that he was a warning of impending doom. I don't know if that's true or not, but I do know that the Mothman is a creature to be feared. Since my encounter with the Mothman, I've had nightmares about him flying over me, his glowing eyes burned into my brain. He's become a permanent part of my life, and I'm always on the lookout for him when I'm out camping or driving through West Virginia. I never want to see him again, but part of me is also drawn to him like a moth to a flame. He's a mystery that I'll never be able to solve, but he's left his mark on me forever. I hope this message finds you well. I've been sitting on a story for quite some time, one that seems more like a plot of a 70s science fiction movie than a part of my life. But as strange as it sounds, it's true. I worked as a flight systems engineer at NASA from the late 60s into the 80s. Those days, my job was all about crunching numbers for trajectory analysis, fine-tuning life support systems, and making sure our orbiter subsystems were in top-notch shape. But there's a bit of my time at NASA that's not just crunching numbers and ticking boxes. It's about something that, even as I type this, I still find hard to believe happened. During the late 70s, we came across 4 beings, entities, if you will, that weren't from our neck of the cosmic woods. They were extraterrestrial, and no, I'm not kidding. The weirdest part? We didn't just observe them, we interviewed them. As unlikely as it sounds, it's the God's honest truth. Please know I'm not trying to spin some grand tale or draw you into a web of fiction. This isn't some 70s sci-fi novel. It's my life. It happened. It's a piece of history, albeit one that's been kept under wraps for obvious reasons. But I believe it's time to share this story with you in all its uncanny detail. So let me dive into the thick of it. One evening in late '79, we just finished monitoring a Skylab re-entry simulation when we received an odd blip on our radar, something that wasn't fitting the usual space debris and satellite signatures. The object was moving in an uncharacteristic pattern, completely defying our understanding of orbital mechanics. It wasn't long before we realized that this was no ordinary space anomaly. With each passing moment, it became increasingly clear that we were dealing with an unidentified flying object. This was uncharted territory, even for us seasoned veterans of the space race. After a high-stakes scramble, the object, or rather the craft, was intercepted and secured in one of our remote facilities. It was a vessel of sorts, a sleek and oddly luminous entity that bore no resemblance to any spacefaring vehicle we'd ever seen or engineered. It was both unnerving and awe-inspiring, a conundrum that challenged our comprehension of technology and physics. But the true shock came when we found out the craft was not empty. Inside were four entities, distinct and yet similar, clearly intelligent, and obviously not of this Earth. Their forms were humanoid, but with distinct differences, their languages indecipherable, yet with a sense of purpose that transcended the barriers of speech. In a bid to understand these beings and their intentions, we initiated a series of interviews under utmost secrecy. As outlandish as it sounds, I was one of the key team members involved in this unprecedented endeavor. The conversations, if one can call them that, were a mix of nonverbal cues, gestures, and a slew of improvised methods that we hoped would bridge the communication gap. Each entity seemed different in demeanor. One was inquisitive, constantly inspecting its surroundings, while another seemed indifferent, almost stoic. The third was what I can only describe as nervous, while the fourth had a certain air of authority, an intangible feeling that it was in some way superior or more knowledgeable. Those interviews pushed the boundaries of our understanding and confronted us with a reality we'd only speculated about in theoretical discussions. Extraterrestrial life was no longer a mere concept. It was real, it was tangible, and it was right in front of us. That's about as far as I can go. But know this, there's more to this story, so much more. Perhaps in time I'll find the words and the courage to share more. For now, I hope this gives you some insight into the extraordinary reality that unfolded during my time at NASA. So, here's the deal. I'm not the kind of guy who believes in the boogeyman or anything, but something happened a few years back that I can't shake. I used to work nights in a warehouse in a not-so-great part of Akron, Ohio. The warehouse was this massive old building, and right behind it was a block of equally ancient apartments. The whole area had a vibe, like it had seen better days, you know? One night I'm on my lunch break, and it's a real nice night, so I head out back to catch some fresh air. I'm just scrolling through my phone when I hear this weird scuffling sound. I look up and there's this shadowy figure moving around behind the apartment building. Now, I've seen raccoons and stuff back there before, but this was different. It was bigger and moved weird, like jerky and kind of hunched over. My first thought was maybe it's some druggie, so I yell out, "Hey, you all right?" This thing stops dead in its tracks, and I swear my heart almost stopped too. It turns around and it isn't human. It's like this tall, lanky thing covered in what looks like fur or rags, I couldn't tell. But its eyes, man, they were this glowing yellow, and it had these long, bony fingers. When it turned to face me, I got a better look at it. This thing was tall. I'm talking like 7 feet, but it was really skinny, like it hadn't eaten in weeks. Its skin looked kind of grayish, and it was covered in patches of this mangy, dark fur. But the face, man, that's what got me. It had this long snout, kind of like a dog, but the mouth was all wrong. It was too wide, and it had these jagged, sharp teeth sticking out. And the smell that came from it was like rotten meat and wet dog. It was so strong I could taste it. The eyes were the worst part. They were this glowing yellow, but not like a regular animal in the headlights. They were almost like they were lit up from inside. And they were intelligent. I know that sounds crazy, but it was like it was sizing me up, thinking things through. The hands, or I guess you could call them claws, were long and bony with these wicked-looking talons at the end. It held them out in front of it, kind of like how a praying mantis does. When it screeched, I saw that its throat had these weird ridges, and it moved like there was something wriggling under the skin. The sound was so loud and piercing that I felt it vibrating through my whole body. I'm frozen, and we're just staring at each other. Then this thing lets out this god-awful screech. I'm talking like a banshee wail mixed with nails on a chalkboard. I don't know how my legs moved, but next thing I know, I'm back inside the warehouse, slamming the door behind me. I tell my buddy Mike, who's working with me, and he's like, "You saw it too?" Turns out, he'd seen the same thing a few weeks back, but didn't say anything because he thought people would think he was losing it. We didn't go back outside for the rest of the night, and you can bet I requested a shift change the next day. I still think about that night a lot. I wonder what it was and where it came from. I've looked into local legends and cryptids, but I haven't found anything that really matches what I saw. After I bolted back inside the warehouse, I remember looking out through one of the small windows next to the door. I saw it turn and scramble up the side of the apartment building, like it was both crawling and climbing at the same time. It disappeared over the roof, and that was the last I saw of it. I know this sounds like something out of a horror movie, but I swear on everything that it's true. I don't know what that thing was, and part of me is glad I never found out. But another part of me can't help but be curious, you know? Anyway, that's my story. Maybe someone out there's seen something similar. Who knows what's lurking in the shadows, right? Thanks for letting me share this. It feels good to get it out there, even if I never got the answers I was looking for. I signed up to work for a freelance security firm to earn some extra cash before the holidays, and I'd worked dozens of jobs without any issues until this happened. I got a call early in the day from my recruiter telling me they needed emergency help because this hotel's usual guy quit his position, effective immediately. They sent me the address and I went in. The front desk worker showed me what I was supposed to do during the night. I had a station in the lobby across from them. I was supposed to act more like a deterrent for crime than anything. And I had to do a round through the hotel every 2 hours to make sure everything was all right. Seemed easy enough. Not long after I settled in the desk, attendants started making small talk. I'm not much of a talker, so I answered in short responses to try and signal like, "Hey, let's just enjoy the quiet." Some time passed, and out of the blue they said to me, "This place is haunted, you know." Of course, I had to ask more about that, but when I did, all they said was, "I'm sure you'll see it for yourself soon enough," then laughed as if it were a normal thing to say. I left to do my first round. I brushed off what they'd said. I've always been skeptical, and some crazy old receptionist wouldn't change that so quickly. The hotel was only 3 stories, with 10 rooms available for guests to stay in. I walked up the first flight of stairs and cleared the second floor. Then I walked up the second set of stairs and began walking down the hall. I couldn't explain it, but something in me was on edge as soon as I stepped foot in the hall. A chill came over me and I felt the hair on my neck stand up. It was quiet as I walked to the end of the hall. I made it halfway back down the hallway, then I heard thumping from above me. It was loud and it sounded like it was coming towards me, like heavy footsteps running almost. I stood in place and looked at the ceiling while I heard the noise. The sound finally reached where I was standing, and just as I was expecting it to move further away, it thumped 3 times right on top of me. As soon as the thumping stopped, I heard a slow creaking noise from behind me. I turned around and the door to one of the rooms I'd walked past had opened. I didn't want to go in. I wanted to turn around and leave. But it was my job for the night and I had to check it out. I walked to the door and knocked on it before I opened it all the way. I yelled, "Hello," to see if anyone responded. I was hoping a guest might have heard the thumping and peeked out to see what it was. No response. I opened the door all the way and turned on the light. There was no one in the room, and it didn't even look like a room they would have guests in. All of the furniture was covered with white sheets, and the pictures and mirrors were off the wall and facing away from view. I couldn't understand how the door opened. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the vibrations from the thumping opened it, or I stepped on a loose floorboard. But it didn't make sense. I closed the door and left. I made my way back down to the lobby and the receptionist was still there, looking at me with a small grin. They asked me if everything was all right on the walk through. I asked her how many people were staying on the 3rd floor, and they told me that only one couple was staying at the hotel, and they were on the 2nd floor. I was clearly confused by that information, and they asked me what happened. I told them. We chatted about some other strange occurrences that had happened at the hotel until my next round. Apparently, people have reported seeing shadowy figures. They've heard knocks at their doors, and no one was there when they answered. And many people have said they've had vivid nightmares. I was apprehensive about my next walkthrough, but I had to do it. The second floor was fine, no disturbances to report. But the third floor was once again noisy. It wasn't thumping this time. I could have sworn I heard crying. I froze when I looked down the hall. The same door was open, and I know I closed it. I approached the room slowly with my hand on my taser and turned on the light. The crying stopped when the light came on. I walked in and looked around the room. I didn't see anyone. I called out for whoever was in there to come out, but I got no response. I walked to the window to make sure it was shut and locked, but as my back was turned, I heard the door slam. I immediately dropped what I was doing to rush to the door. I opened it and walked out of the room. At the end of the hall, I saw her. A woman stood in front of the stairs with her face in her hands like she was crying. My heart fell to my feet and I froze in place. Thumping noises began above me again and rapidly made their way towards the woman. The door to another room creaked open and she walked inside. I ran down the stairs back to the lobby without looking back. I told the receptionist what I saw and they nodded their head. It wasn't a new story to them. I suppose this is why the other security guy quit on such short notice.